So I want to know, why do you think Indian people, like some of the older generation, are opposed to talking about mental health and therapy and taking care of your mental well-being and things like that? Hi everyone, welcome back to Who's Your Amma podcast. Today we have a very exciting guest. Her name is Sanam Naran. Did I say it right?
Yeah, you did.
And she is from Conscious Psychology. That's her practice. You may know her on Instagram and TikTok. Her username is the Conscious Psychologist, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Is there anything else I missed out there that you'd like to add about who you are and what you do?
I guess that I started a practice that is focused mainly on brown people issues or Indian intergenerational trauma. And yeah, that's just a little bit about my passion, I guess.
Do you feel like there was a gap in the market, so to speak, that you thought this is what needs to be done because there isn't someone that's doing what I'm doing?
Yeah. So I think growing up, I went to a lot of psychologists.
Okay.
And I never felt like there was a psychologist that I could really talk to about the intricacies of being in an Indian household until I found an Indian psychologist. And I was like, oh, okay, this feels like she gets me.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of where I got the idea of let's start a practice that is focused on this. And I think representation, again, is so important, especially when it comes to mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's so inspiring that you said that. I find it so interesting when people say that someone who helped them in their childhood inspired their career path as adults.
Yeah.
So that's so cool. If there's someone out there who wants to study this or take the same path as you, what courses would you suggest? Where would you suggest they study? Just give some info on that.
So I think first and foremost, it's to realize that it's a really long journey. So it's about 8 years. And that you have to get into your master's in order to become a psychologist. And in your master's year, they only take 6 per year.
Wow.
And I didn't know that. So I went and I thought, oh, I'm going to be a psychologist, study for 4 years, do my undergrad. But it really wasn't like that. So just do your BA. That's how you start your BA in psychology. You then have to apply for your honors and then apply for your master's. But do it wherever you can get in. So any accredited university is fine. Just understand that it's a long journey.
I have a question that I've always wanted to ask. Is it hard, or do they give you the tools when you're studying to separate yourself from the client when you say bye to them? Like, for me, it's very hard I get very involved in someone's life. Like if I'm helping someone through something, I feel almost responsible for what they're going through. Is it hard to separate yourself from clients?
Yeah. It's very difficult, especially with clients who are going through something you're currently going through or you've been through. But it's something that comes with practice. Like as you keep going and you keep doing it, it gets easier. But yeah, it's something that I still struggle with.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So usually I ask my guests, and I also share a highlight and a low light of the week, and we call it your rose and your thorn.
Okay.
So could you share something that made you smile this week and something that was the thorn this week?
Wow. Okay. I like that, by the way.
Thank you. I feel so validated now that a therapist said she likes something I do. I hope I don't cry on this episode. I really hope I don't cry. Probably will. I cry a lot. What's wrong with me? Why do I cry? No, I'm joking. Neon Pineapple is a creative influencer marketing agency who connects you with the perfect social media influencers. From the sparkling nano stars to the A-list celebs, think of us as your matchmakers for the digital age. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and don't know where to start with influencers, no worries. We offer a 360-degree approach, crafting custom campaigns that tell your story and reach your target audience. We even provide data analysis to see what's working and what's not. Because let's face it, sometimes your content needs a little extra juice. Bonus, we don't just do digital. Need some traditional PR muscle? Neon Pineapple has that covered too, from press releases to event management. Stop feeling like a social media wallflower. I mean, even Penelope got off that wall. And let Neon Pineapple make you the star of the show, like Lady Whistledown. Head over to www.neonpineapple to learn more. And follow at Neon Pineapple Agency on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Okay. I think a rose for me would be... So, my dad and I are very close.
Okay.
And I asked him to film a video with me this week for the first time. So it was like the first time that we actually he was open to it, and I really put myself out there on social media with showing him as well. But it was really nice. We bonded over that, and yeah,
so
it was really
sweet.
nice.
That's gonna be you and your baby one day, Trevino, behind the camera.
Thorn. So my gran is struggling with dementia, and it's progressively getting a lot worse. And this week, particularly, I noticed how worse it has gotten. And I noticed that I avoid a lot. I avoid her because I'm not dealing with those emotions properly. So yeah, it's been really difficult.
For me, I would say that my rose is finally having you on the podcast. I know we rescheduled a couple of times, and if you're watching the video, I have questions. I've been so excited the whole week. I've been telling everyone I can't wait. I have questions from family. I have questions from people on the internet. So I'm very excited for this episode. And I would say my thorn is similar to what you are sharing. Last week, we lost Trevino's grandfather. And I don't know why. Even today, I was telling Trevino that I feel like I haven't allowed myself to grieve. I did cry, but I feel like every time I think of him, I just try and focus on something else and try to keep myself busy. And I'm not sure if it's because I know that he's in heaven and he's doing much better than he was doing here, or if it's just because I don't want to deal with it right now. So I'm not sure what's going on. I'll figure that out. But yeah, that has been my thorn for the week. Don't tell me what's wrong with me now.
Okay.
Tell me off camera. Okay, so we spoke a little bit off camera about why you felt it was important to start the practice that you currently have. And when I was pregnant, so the medical aid that I'm with has a maternity benefit, and part of that maternity benefit is you get 2 postpartum counseling sessions. So the criteria that I needed to be met for me to do this was that my therapist had to be a female, because that's what I felt comfortable with, and she had to be Indian, because the things that I was talking about was very specific to our culture, and I needed her to understand what was going on. So why do you think it's important for people to have a therapist that can relate to them and relate to their struggles and their issues?
So not only does it obviously make the client feel comfortable that, okay, this person's going to get me. I don't have to re-explain, make them understand certain things that an Indian psychologist will just get on the first time that they hear it. So you're not wasting a lot of sessions, a lot of your expensive sessions, having to just explain things over and over again. And it's really small things. It's intricate, nuanced things that someone who's grown up in the same kind of household will just understand. So for me, it's important to have Indian psychologists in my practice, but also psychologists who have been through a lot of struggles within their family. So yeah, I think
so they also kind of share from a place of experience and not knowing what's going on.
Yeah,
so they know exactly what's going on. That's so good. It's so important. And like I said in the beginning, I think it's so important, and it's such a good thing of what you've created, because it doesn't exist. And looking from the outside, it really does make me feel comfortable to know that if I need help again, I know exactly where to go, because they're female, they're Indian, they know what I'm going through. And you don't only have Indian therapists.
Yeah,
right?
So it's people of color.
Yes.
And I think as people of color also, our struggles are very different. So yeah, it's a lot of cultures, it's a lot of
languages offered.
Languages.
Which is so cool. Okay, to start off with, I want to discuss some buzzwords that we see a lot on social media. I feel like mental health has been spoken about a lot more frequently in the recent years, especially after COVID. So I just want to if you can explain these terms so that people can understand what to expect going forward. Gaslighting. What does that mean?
So in very basic terms, it's when somebody makes you question your own reality.
Ooh.
Yeah. So it's, for example, if you go to your partner and say, when you did this last week, it really made me feel upset. And they were like, oh, wait, but I didn't do that. So they really make you question that something actually happened.
Wow.
In order to minimize your experience.
That's such a good explanation. Dysfunctional family.
Wow. So I think to explain a dysfunctional family would be just a family that has unhealthy patterns of behaviors within the family. And every family has unhealthy patterns, but it's when the unhealthy patterns override the healthy patterns.
Ooh, that's good. Self-abandonment.
So I'd say self-abandonment is when you put your needs last and put everyone else's needs before yours.
Shout out to all the eldest daughters.
Definitely.
Imposter syndrome.
It's when you feel like you're not competent, not good enough, and you don't deserve where you are.
Hyper-independence. I can't even read my own handwriting. Hyper-independence.
Hyper-independence would be where you basically take on all the responsibility.
Shout out to all the
yourself.
eldest daughters again.
Yeah. And you never ask for help.
Oh, you are reading me. Inner child.
Inner child would be, so we all have an inner child. We've all got that child within us that has been through certain things growing up in their family, in their childhood, in their upbringing, that lives within us every day.
Okay. Narcissist.
This one's interesting.
Tell us. Make it comfortable.
So I'd say we all have narcissistic tendencies. So we all have these traits within us that can be narcissistic. But a true narcissist would be someone who thinks they're better than others. They're completely entitled. They don't have a lot of empathy for others or for themselves.
Would you also say it's kind of like pride? It's being prideful.
Definitely.
Okay.
But at the core of them is an intense inadequacy.
Do you think that people who are narcissists, is it something that develops over time? Is it something that happens overnight? Or is it something like fundamentally wrong that happened maybe in their childhood or something, and it's just made them the way they are?
So I believe, and not everyone believes the same, but I do believe that it's something that happens in childhood, whether it's intense trauma or abuse, or intense
Neglect, maybe?
Neglect. But then on the other side of the spectrum would be a parent who is overly involved, who
like a
praises you too
helicopter
much.
parent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Helicopter parent.
Okay, wow. Getting parenting tips here too. This is a word that I didn't know existed until it popped up on my For You page. Enmeshment.
So the first thing I think of when I hear that word is brown boys and their mothers. Very, very close. No boundaries between their, in their relationship.
Do you know, I feel so awkward in this episode because I feel like if I laugh, someone is going to say she's going through that. Or if I cry, I'm just, okay, guys, I'm just, okay. It's not personal. It's funny. It's very funny.
Yeah. So a relationship where there's codependency, there's no boundaries. And it's difficult to separate between those two people.
And then the last word, I feel like this word is misused by a lot of celebrities, and I feel like sometimes maybe people can interchange it for nervousness. The word is anxiety.
So I think with anxiety, I think that's something we've all felt at some point in our lives. I think to be diagnosed with anxiety is a different story.
Okay.
But to be anxious is to feel nervous.
Okay.
But to be diagnosed with anxiety is to feel so nervous that you aren't able to function properly.
Okay. There are some questions later on from followers about how to deal with panic attacks and anxiety.
Okay.
So we'll speak about that there. But to start off with a bang, last year, like I said, I gave birth, and when I think I was like 3 months postpartum or something, and I don't know if you watched it, the latest Kandasami's movie premiered on Netflix. And basically, if you guys haven't watched it, the daughter has a baby and she goes through a lot with her parents and with her in-laws. And I created a video and I posted it on TikTok, basically asking why are Indians like this. And I understand my mistake was generalizing and saying that our whole generation is in therapy, and that made some people angry. But a lot of the things that I was saying is true in the Indian community. It was on a whole Netflix movie. So many people were resonating with stuff that I said in the comments. So I want to know, why do you think Indian people, like some of the older generation, are opposed to talking about mental health and therapy and taking care of your mental well-being and things like that?
I think this is such an important question because if I'm being completely honest, I think when I do videos around Indian people on TikTok, on Instagram, the most hate I get is from my own community.
Correct, 100% correct.
And to me, that just shows me that there's a complete denial or avoidance of emotions, of mental health, of their own struggles and their own stuff. And when you point it out to them, they get angry, defensive. So it's like, okay, I'm not even gonna think about that because it rings true for me. It's triggering something. But I also think that there's a complete denial of mental health and talking about your emotions in our community, because I think it goes so far back as colonization, apartheid, all of that, where we had to survive through so many struggles that we had no time to think about our emotions. All we had to do was just, fend for ourselves and survive. And so we carried that on and on and on to protect us.
Yeah.
But it no longer serves us.
Yeah, that's so true. I wonder if they, like the older generation, looks at us and thinks we're weak because they went through all of that and here we are complaining about something you can't see.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the comments I get is, well, my grandparents were fine. They didn't go to therapy.
Yeah.
But they were fine. But were they fine?
Were they fine?
Yeah, were they fine?
And also, how would you deal with that now, though? Because, say, those same grandparents, when you talking about these things and they just brush it off and say, you'll be fine or whatever, drink some water, have some tea, have some turmeric milk or whatever it is. How do you deal with that, knowing that what you are going through is valid and true and it's your experience and it is happening? But the people that are causing this, because they haven't dealt with their own issues or because they don't know how to deal with the fact that they've been called out on their behavior, how do you deal with that, knowing that the person responsible for making you feel a certain way is not accepting responsibility?
I think that's so difficult because everyone wants an apology or wants someone to validate.
And why don't they apologize? Even in that movie, no one apologized to Jodie.
Yeah.
Why?
And it's so difficult to heal if you're not getting that apology or if you're not getting acknowledged. But you have to realize that you have to do that for yourself. You have to be the one to validate those emotions. As much as that it's not the best, process, it's not going to come from them and you can't change them.
So how do you deal then with, okay, say you're not going to get an apology, but then when you see those people again or when you're in a situation with those people again, everyone acts like everything is normal, like nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? Like, I get frustrated. For me, I'm the type of person where if something is going on, I need it to be resolved properly. People need to apologize and we need to come up with a solution going forward, how to avoid this. But if someone does something and is continuously doing the same things and not talking about it, how do you deal with that? How are you supposed to deal with that?
I think it depends on the situation, but if it's not an abusive situation, then I'd say you bring it up, you talk about it, you sit them down and try.
So awkward.
It's so awkward. And a lot of people will look at me and be like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And I know it's difficult, but the only way is to do it. And their reaction might not be what you want. It might not be, what you're hoping for. But again, as long as you're not abandoning yourself. But also then on the side to have other support systems in your life that you can lean on.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Wow. A lot of what you're saying is reminding me of my sessions with my therapist also, because she's been saying the same things to me.
Yeah.
We spoke about self-abandonment and eldest daughter's issues a little bit. So my daughter is in her Disney phase. So she's currently watching a lot of songs from Encanto.
Okay.
And one of the songs there is Surface Pressure. And I think when the movie came out, it had a lot of buzz online for that specific song because it was about the eldest sister and carrying the burden of the family and being the strongest and not being able to show any cracks in her personality or whatever it is. So we know that eldest daughters, or me, let me speak for myself and not generalize. I'm a perfectionist. I'm a people's pleaser. I need people to like me. And it's very frustrating. If I feel like someone has a problem with me, then it plays on my mind and I need to fix it because I don't like feeling that way. So can we talk about eldest daughter syndrome and the conscious changes that we can make so that she's not overwhelmed when she grows up? And it's not something that was on purpose placed on me where my parents were like, do all of this. It's just something that, I don't know if Indian daughters just naturally become, like on TikTok, they call it the dad. I don't know what it is, but it's not something that my parents placed on me. It's just something that happened. And it's not only me, I see it with other eldest daughters too.
Yeah.
So what changes are there for me, for other parents watching, of things that we can do so that we don't place the same pressures on our children?
I think it's important to know that the first child is usually the child that the parents make the most mistakes on.
That's you, Ollie. You, my first child.
So you get all the parents' projections as the first child, whether you're a female or a male. But I think parents, especially Indian parents with the first daughter, they unconsciously place a lot of responsibility on them.
Wow.
And it's not something, like you said, that they do on purpose.
Yes.
It's very unconscious. And so as the first daughter, you become what we call parentified, where you take on the role of an adult when you're very young. So you really never get to be a child.
Yeah.
And then when you grow up, you hyper independent and you care a lot about what people think. And you put everyone else's needs before your own. But a way to not have that happen and to not continue that cycle is to be a parent that is conscious. So to do your own inner work, and only if you do your own inner work are you not going to pass that on to the next generation.
That's so true.
And realize that, they're a child and they need to be children. They don't have to be well behaved and composed and fit this mold. They're just a child.
They're also learning how to navigate their emotions and feelings.
Yeah.
Have you had any couples come to you? And I'm asking this because Trevino and I are both eldest children. So have you had any couples come to you where they're also both eldest children and maybe there's been conflict in their marriage, and how do they deal with that? Because obviously they're both overly independent. They both maybe were raised to do things a specific way, being the eldest children. There's more pressure on them, and then they have other siblings to take care of. Or have you had situations like that?
I see a lot of couples. But I think with what you're mentioning, there have been a lot of them who are firstborn kids. And the issue there is, again, the responsibility that they take from their parents. So the need to, or the duty of looking after their parents, whether it's financially or emotionally or
physically.
Yeah. And then that obviously infiltrates the relationship, the marriage.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to then put that relationship first when, you're responsible. You've got so many responsibilities. So yeah, it's definitely something I've noticed.
So for me, speaking from like a Christian spiritual background, one of the things that we learned in premarital counseling is that in the Bible, it says that the husband leaves his parents' home and cleaves to his wife. So that's how we also navigate our marriage, is that we know that God comes first, and then it's the husband and the wife, and then the children, and then the external family. So if anyone is wondering how to navigate that, that's how we navigate our lives and our hierarchy, so to speak. How do we raise a generation that's comfortable sharing emotions, and how do we respond in a healthy way if it's not something that our generation is used to?
So I think first and foremost, whenever we see someone crying, we say, don't cry. And we think we're comforting them.
I do that.
We think we're saying like, it's
Yeah.
okay, don't cry.
Yeah.
But even those, it's almost like a microaggression. It's so
Wow.
indirect that what they take from that is, okay, I shouldn't cry. Like, let me just,
Yeah.
wipe these tears away and be composed. So it's little things. It's when someone cries, let them cry,
Yeah.
And we are so uncomfortable as brown people when someone cries. We don't know what to
my
do.
word, I'm still like that at my big age of 30. If someone's crying, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah,
what
you're
to
like,
do.
do I give them tissues? Do I?
Yeah, water. What do you want? Do you want tea? I don't know.
And it's similar in therapy. So when a client cries, we don't give them tissues. The tissues are next to them, but we're not like, here, have tissues, because unconsciously that's saying like, wipe yourself.
Wipe yourself. Get yourself fixed.
Get yourself together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's just making space for people's emotions, allowing people to express emotions to you without trying to fix it, without trying to give them solutions. Or, I think our default is to be like, well, have you tried this? Or why don't you do this? Or, but I think that's invalidating what they're feeling as well, because you're saying, fix it. When sometimes it doesn't need to be fixed, it just needs to be expressed.
On the flip side of that, so I've also seen that, and when my daughter cries, I try to just comfort her. Do you think that comforting her when she cries, do you think that it's a good thing, or do you think that at some point it could become coddling?
So this debate has been around for a while. Around, do you let your child just cry without comforting them, or do you go and comfort them? And there's so many theories out there that say, do not let them cry on their own, because you're not allowing them a safe container. They're when they're crying, they don't know what to do with themselves. They're just a child. But when you or whoever, as a parent, comes to them and is able to hold those emotions for them, without, again, saying, I'm going to give you a sweet, or I'm going to take this pain away from you. I think that's important. It's not coddling. I think it's so important to comfort them and also allow them to understand what they're feeling. So to say to them, I see you're feeling sad right now, to give it a name, so they also understand that, okay, this is what I'm going through right now.
Wow. How do you feel, dads, about that? Thumbs up. On your Instagram page, you have a post of some of the common reasons why people go to therapy. And one of them was mother-in-law issues specifically. Why are in-laws such a big issue in the Indian community?
So I think there's a few reasons, but what stands out for me the most is a lot of brown dads are emotionally unavailable.
Ooh.
And so what happens is the mom compensates for that through her son's love.
Wow.
And so there comes that, overly involved mother-in-law, the enmeshment, the codependency, because she needs to survive. She needs to protect herself. And then the son also, because he's had an emotionally unavailable dad, also feels the need to compensate.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that I notice quite a lot.
There are quite a few questions about in-laws coming up, so we can unpack this more.
Okay.
And then let's talk about intergenerational trauma in brown families. And what does that mean, and what does it look like? Does someone have my phone? I have my phone for the questions. Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Okay. Intergenerational trauma is basically the trauma that we've had to endure as a population. Whether this was, again, back in colonization, slavery, whatever it is, we carried that trauma from generation to generation, and nobody really dealt with it. And it affects us very unconsciously. You might be like, oh, colonization happened hundreds of years ago. How is that affecting me? But it's a cycle. So if something happens to, for example, your grandfather, he would pass that trauma on to your father. Your father will then pass that trauma on to you. So if nobody's breaking that trauma and ending those cycles, it just gets...
What would one of those, what would something like a tangible example that someone can say, hey, this has been happening to me.
Yeah.
Like, do you have any specific example of something that maybe has been passed down in terms of that?
For example, having a grandfather who maybe had an alcoholic, had issues with alcoholism. And because of that, they were not present in their marriage. They were not present as a father either. Then had a child who they again weren't present around because they were dealing with their alcoholism, which may have been passed on from their father.
Yeah.
And then that child would have, again, an emotionally unavailable father, a father that might be overly aggressive, and internalizes all of that, feels like they're not good enough, they're not worthy of having a parent that cares about them, will then end up having abandonment issues.
Oh, wow.
Will then also not be able to deal with their emotions because of learned behavior that, okay, my dad deals with emotions through alcoholism, so let me do the same. But yeah, again, a fear of abandonment, feeling like they're not good enough, gets married,
It does the same thing.
does the same thing.
Okay. Would you say that another example is perhaps having a father who is always busy and always working because he's scared of being poor, and then therefore he's never present, and then it keeps going to the next generation and the next generation,
Yeah.
where maybe the husband feels the pressure of being the provider for his family and he's just always working, always not at home because he's working.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So it's not only emotional unavailability, but just physically also
Physically
not
being
being
unavailable.
Yeah.
Okay. I have two very specific ones. Let me just go to them quickly. Okay, it's fine. I'll find them now. But how do you deal with an overbearing mother-in-law and husband who is blinded by it?
This one's very difficult, and I think it's so complex because it depends on that specific family and the challenges that family is facing, and you as a person, how comfortable are you with placing boundaries? What I say here is it's your husband's mother. He needs to step up in some way. He
Yeah.
needs to be the one to put those boundaries. It shouldn't be on you.
Yeah.
But again, I know that there's so many husbands who aren't able to see that.
Yeah.
But I guess that's where the inner work comes in. You have to have some self-awareness around, okay, there's a lot of dysfunction going on here. What do I need to do? So I always say it's difficult as a daughter-in-law to put boundaries with their mother-in-law.
Yes.
It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
It needs to come from the husband.
And also, one of the things that I've learned about boundaries is if the husband and wife don't keep those boundaries and enforce those boundaries, everyone else is going to see that it's not real. It's flimsy. They can do whatever they want to because
Yeah.
the couple haven't set those boundaries themselves and they're not
Yeah.
firm in those boundaries themselves. I found the question that I was looking for. Why do mothers say things that are just offensive? I don't know if they realize this or if it's an old people thing. Like talking about people's weight is not okay.
I think when someone, especially the Indian aunties, when they speak about your appearance, they comment on your skin color, your weight, your hair, whatever it is, your outfit, it's often coming from a place of insecurity. That's really just what it is. They're projecting their own shitty feelings about
Yes.
themselves onto you,
Onto you.
because they know you're not going to say anything,
Yeah.
or you can't say anything. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know how to say this, but here it goes. Brown parents claiming their kids and feeling like the kids owe them their lives once they're grown and working and moved out. Wait, there's two questions here. Okay, yeah, that's the first question. And the second one is again about mother-in-laws.
I think that's again where codependency comes in, is that Indian families or Indian parents often feel like they can't separate from their children. Because again, they put all their worth into having kids and into, bringing up this kid in a specific way where they're getting degrees
marks,
and
yeah.
all of that. And their whole reputation is based around their children.
Child. Wow.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so if that separation happens, they don't know who they are. They have no identity separate to their kids.
I can so relate to what you're saying because Talia is only 10 months old and she is a baby, so I do have to be spending more time with her. But I feel like in this process, I have kind of lost myself a little bit because everything is about her and everything is for her. The only time I do anything for myself is when I go do my nails, and that's like a 1 hour thing, and that's because I have to, because I'm on camera and I need to have my nails done. And wow, okay, reading me once again. Mother-in-laws having favorite daughter-in-laws and treating them differently based on who buys stuff for them. The more expensive the gift, the better you get treated.
Again, this has to do with reputation. So to brag, like, oh, this my daughter-in-law bought me this and it's better than yours. So there's a lot of that. The reputation is what would people think about this?
Why is that such a thing in our community? What will people think? Why, where does that come from?
So I'm going to say this again, but I think it came from the trauma we experienced, through colonization, through all of that, and having to protect ourselves in a way. So again, we were in survival mode, and we had to, be able to put food on our table and be able to survive. And through all that trauma, there were specific defense mechanisms that we had to grow or enforce in order to survive. And the one being, what would people think? The one being reputation. To feel better about ourselves, to be able to what's the word? To fill the void.
Wow.
And I think it's also influenced by media and by Bollywood and by being a collectivist community. We're a small community. Everyone knows everything about each other.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah. And so we feel better about ourselves when people think certain things of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes also these things aren't even true. It's just a front you're putting on to seem better to other people and to seem wealthier, or to seem like your family has it all together. Meanwhile, everyone is struggling with something. Everyone's going through something, but it's just a front that we put on. And I feel like that's so unhealthy, especially for young, impressionable minds, to see that we're lying about these things to seem better off than other people. I feel like that's such a bad thing to do.
Definitely. And I noticed that we're a community that has so much of shame. And shame breeds anxiety, and we're such an anxious community as well. So when we're lying about things or hiding certain things or keeping secrets, it's just building that shame.
Sure, that's so true. Wow. As new parents, family being entitled and telling you how to raise your kid. It's a matter of do this and don't do that because this is what I did, and this is how I raised my children.
So with that, I think, again, they feel threatened when you do things your way. When you do things your way, they internalize it as they did it wrong, when that's not necessarily what you're saying. So a lot of things get taken personally.
Oh yes, that's so true.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe also sometimes they feel like you are excluding them.
Yeah.
But it's not that you're intentionally excluding them. It's that you just want to try something differently and do something different, which I don't think is a bad thing.
Definitely.
I don't think it's a bad thing. Oh, here's the question I was telling you about earlier. How do you deal with sister-in-laws who take the role of the late mom-in-law on her own and thinks she and her husband have the right to do whatever they want with your baby?
So sister-in-laws is also a very common thing. Sister-in-laws, mother-in-laws, that type of thing. And I think that it's usually the eldest daughter. And I just think it's a learned behavior. It's you've also been so codependent with your mom that you've taken on all these characteristics that she had. And you're just not self-aware enough to change that.
Yeah.
You just think you have to be that way because she was like that.
Yeah.
And anything else, anything different to that feels threatening to the family unit. Yeah.
I don't understand why mother-in-laws and sister-in-laws treat the daughter-in-law in a specific way, because I was in an environment where a mother-in-law said something about her daughter-in-law, and then someone else also jumped in on that. And I looked at the second person and I'm like, you have a daughter that's dating a boy. How would you feel if his mother did to your daughter what you're doing to this other lady's daughter?
Exactly.
Like, do they not think about that process? Like, I also have children.
Yeah.
What if someone does this to my child?
Exactly. And they were also a daughter-in-law at some point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
But honestly, I just think that daughter-in-laws are looked at as slaves. Like,
Wow.
that's your worth and that's it.
Sure. Ooh, at the old age of 35, how do you choose yourself and stop being a people pleaser?
Firstly, 35 is not old.
Yeah, it's not old. What do you mean old age?
But I think it's never too late. For example, my dad has just started therapy now, and he's in his late
Wow.
50s.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's never too late. And I think the moment you realize that you need to start putting yourself first, that's the perfect time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. That is good. Okay, again about boundaries. I think when it comes to in-laws and boundaries, it's important for the child of that parent
Yeah.
to set the boundaries. Like, it doesn't work. You can't set boundaries with your in-laws. The husband has to do it or the wife has to do it with her parents.
Yeah. And something I notice a lot is that clients will come into therapy and they'll ask you as a psychologist to tell me what boundaries I can place. Like, just give me the answers. And that's not necessarily something that we can do in therapy. I think it's something so unique to that specific family. But the main thing, like you said, is the son has to do that, to take up that role.
Yeah. How do you deal with someone who is mistreating you as a result of them processing their trauma? The someone is your mom, and the person who gave her this trauma is your dad. So the child is basically getting mistreated from her mother dealing with trauma from her marriage with her father.
That's a difficult one. And I think it's difficult because you're empathizing to some extent with the mom because you've seen what the dad might have done. But I think you can hold two things together at the same time. You can hold the fact that you feel bad for what your mom's been through, but it's also not okay for you to be treated in that way. And I think people struggle with that. People struggle with holding two completely opposite things together. So that just because you have empathy doesn't mean it's okay that she's mistreating you. You still need to have your own boundaries and you still need to be doing your own work.
How to respond or cope with your partner who sabotages happy occasions because they are angry or depressed?
They need to grow up. Really?
Oh, plain and simple. I like that. I like that. Straight to the point. Grow up.
Yeah, I mean, that's something a child would do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating when you see adults behaving like children, and I'm just like, why? Why? Why?
It's also not for you to take on. That's something they need to deal with.
I think that's something that I've also struggled with, is trying to fix other people's emotions and feel responsible for other people's emotions.
Yeah.
Shout out to eldest daughters again. Okay, this one I think is important. How to cope with panic attacks. So any tools that you can share that people can deal with panic attacks and how to cope with them.
So I've been noticing this more and more in my practice is clients coming in for panic attacks. And the reason panic attacks happen is because you have for so long suppressed emotions that your body is now at its capacity and needs to release.
Sure.
So that's what a panic attack is, basically.
Wow.
But to deal with a panic attack, I think the first thing I always say is go to therapy. Just start there. But what you can do in the moment is, obviously there's a lot of breathing techniques that you can find on Google, grounding techniques as well. Something that I find works really well is have a very sour sweet in your bag or in your pocket with you. And when you notice this panic attack coming up, have that sweet and it completely distracts you. Might not work all the time, but distraction is a good way in the moment when it comes to panic attacks.
I remember when I used to get panic attacks, I think it was like just after high school, I used to always focus on my senses. So something that could distract me with what I feel. And then I look for, like, say we're sitting in the room now, I look for 5 things I can see that are white just to distract me from what's going on. What can I smell now? What can I taste? Again, the sour sweet. So I like those. I like those a lot. How do you deal with a toxic workplace?
That one's difficult because it's not always easy to put boundaries.
Yeah.
I often notice though that the thing that is triggering you the most at work is often something that you have dealt or have had to deal with in your childhood. So for example, a very domineering parent, you're gonna get triggered by having a domineering manager.
Yeah.
So again, it's just about doing that inner work to figure out what's going on, what's triggering me. And if you work on that, it will trigger you less at work. Not to say that work environment isn't toxic. It may be. It's just that something that you've dealt with early on in life could be triggering it 10 times more.
This one I think is very self-explanatory. I skin pick my fingers a lot and very badly to the point that it bleeds. Is that anxiety?
It is anxiety, but it's also a bit of OCD.
Okay.
So when you've got OCD and anxiety together, it often leads to skin picking.
Okay. Someone also said this about pimples on their face.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that somewhere.
Yeah. So it's a compulsion. So with OCD, you're very compulsive and you do repetitive behaviors.
Okay.
So if you're like constantly doing this with your finger, because you're anxious, so the underlying emotion there is anxiety.
Okay. Just on OCD, I should have put this in the buzzwords. OCD doesn't necessarily mean that you need all the mugs facing a certain way. What is OCD, and then what is that thing of, like I said, I need the space on the side of the TV to be exactly in frame.
Yeah.
What is the difference between that and OCD? Because I feel like everyone just says that's OCD.
Yeah. And I think people also struggle with the distinction between perfectionism and OCD. So sometimes,
Got you.
yeah, sometimes it's just, perfectionism. But with OCD, it's really just about repetitive behaviors that make you feel soothed. So whether it's checking the door 10 times or shaking your leg to feel calm.
I've been doing that.
But that again doesn't mean you're diagnosed with OCD.
Okay.
To be diagnosed with OCD,
I'm a little bit like Melman from Madagascar. Like if someone tells me something, I'm like, I have it.
to be diagnosed with OCD is you'd have to meet all the criteria, and it also needs to then affect you socially, occupationally, personally, to a point where you cannot function anymore. You can't get up and go actually get to work because you're checking the door 20 times. That's OCD. So with OCD, it's also a compulsion. So you've got this desire to do something, and it's almost like you don't have control. So I often say it's repetitive behaviors, but also a compulsion. So you pull to doing something, a specific behavior over and over again.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then last question for me. What would you say are some healthy tools to deal with grief?
So I think...
Ollie, why are you judging me? Why? Did you just fart here, Ollie? This is not the time. This is not the time to fart, Ollie.
So I think when it comes to grief, especially when it happened so soon, it's okay to distract yourself. It's okay to keep yourself busy and not think about it until you feel ready. Don't avoid it forever. But initially it's okay to distract yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, and then when you're ready to let yourself go there, whether it's through therapy, whether it's through speaking about memories with your loved ones. But I think with grief it's difficult because it's something that you can grieve for the rest of your life about that person. It's not something to say, okay, you've grieved a year and then you're over it. It's something that you learn how to, you adjust your life in order to now deal with the loss of this person. So it becomes a part of your life.
I remember seeing a picture on social media. It was where like grief was a pebble and it was in a jar. And instead of the grief pebble getting bigger, the jar just got bigger. So basically saying that your life just keeps growing and the grief is still there, but your life gets fuller.
Yeah.
And you're able to handle the grief. Thank you so much. I really, really had a good time. Any questions? Last call? Any questions? No questions? Free therapy? Ollie, any questions? Why do I only get one treat a day? Okay. Do you just want to share where people can find you, how they can contact you, what they can expect when they set up a therapy session, and just all your social media?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
This was
I
a
had
lot
such
of
good
fun.
time.
Yeah, me too.
I'm glad.
Yeah, so you can find me on all the socials at The Conscious Psychologist. If you do want to set up a therapy session, make sure you're ready. But you can contact me on Instagram, on WhatsApp, or you can just Google The Conscious Psychologist and I'll be there.
And I'll put everything in the description also of this video.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated it.
Thank you for opening a space like this to discuss these topics.
I'm a little bit nervous about the feedback, but it's fine. We'll deal with it when
We'll
that
deal with
happens. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.